So we're back with Petey two-finger and my obsession with Roland Boss guitar gear, the JC120, the Stratocaster, the Boss RPS-10, the Roland guitar synthesizers, and the VG8, VG88, VG99. I don't really know about it. I've played it. I've heard it. My opinion on it is it's a better version than the VG8, but maybe not. Sometimes they don't always get better when they come out with the newer version. Then the VG8 was when I checked out. When they start charging $3,000 or $200 and $695 for the unit, and then you got to buy another $300 pickup and all that. You're going to round up, and it's going to be cheaper to buy a car. Now, we talked about my experiences playing in these cover bands, and I was using a Strat with the guitar synth playing bass, EQing the synth, and then I would run the straight guitar sound. I would run it through a reverb unit, a Boss half rack, and then through the reverse delay through my JC120. So on the choruses of certain songs with slower tempos, I could turn the straight guitar on and have that flipping around, going through a reverb and creating this wash, which added a really cool element to a lot of songs that we covered. And I was using like fretless sounds, all bass tones, and I would run an EQ pedal, an Arian bass EQ, and I would get rid of all the frequencies except the bass frequencies, and that made, I would set my amp that way too, and the PA. And it made the guitar synth bass sounds really good. And they had like a bank, like a Seinfeld, like slap. I never used any of those patches. So our band in Chicago was doing covers, and whenever other bands saw us, they would line up, and they would eventually be all by my side of the stage, squinting, looking, because they were trying to figure out who's playing bass. Everybody's got a Strat. And like I had a FC100. We all had the Roland stuff. We had MIDI foot controls, so we would have a MIDI cable, and all of our patches would line up. So when you change patch on your one unit, they would all change. And for a cover band, yeah, that was a lot to have, but it made it really fun for me. And there were some songs where the tracking, like if you're playing in open E, that's really doesn't want to track as well as you would think it would. That's the most difficult point on the Strat for the synth pickup to keep up with your playing. So it will glitch and play an incorrect note or skip playing a note more often than any other position on the guitar. Like the opposite of that would be your highest note. It would track the fastest. And that's the downside of the synth, is you real quickly realize that playing a guitar synth sucks. It's just creating massive amount of lag between when you want the note and when it to come out. Unless you can compensate and play ahead of the measure, which some people can. So guitar synth, if you take it and process it, if you take it and treat it as a guitar sound and run it through some effects, you can come up with some really interesting leads if you mix it with the clean guitar. But really, you're better off, especially nowadays, just getting a MIDI controller and playing that stuff. Mind you, it can like if you've never played, my advice to you, if you're obsessed with guitar synthesizer because you're a fan of Adrian Belew, that's not how he's getting his cool guitar sounds. He's getting those with effects and technique. So as we progress through that, again, I haven't played the newer Boss and Roland guitar synth models that have come out. I've lost interest, and I've gone my own direction with music, which doesn't include guitar synth so much. I still use my VG8 for recording because it's phenomenal, and we're going to talk about that. As far as me shedding throwing shade on all the Roland Boss, the guitar synth stuff. And again, I don't know about the newer stuff. I know they have a pedal that you don't need the GK2 hexaphonic pickup to use it, which is the 13-pin cable. It's more expensive. It's a heavier cable. It requires that you modify the guitar. So this is a huge barrier between the everyday guitar player and this equipment. And that's why I'm making these videos. If you're out there and you've never experienced it and you think, oh, that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, Baloo used it, and you've heard some Baloo music and it blows your mind, I'm here to tell you, you don't need a guitar synth to do that. Chances are he's playing in reverse when you think it's a synth. I went to a Psychodots gig. Like, we went to Baloo's house and I met him, and then he invited us to the gig, and eventually I became obsessed with the music of Rob Fetters, who is Adrian's bandmate in The Bears, Adrian's 80s pop band from Cincinnati, Ohio. They did 4 albums. They did 2 tours. They broke up because the label folded. They got back together 2 more times in like the 90's or Y2K and did a couple more albums. Now the drummer died last year, so it's a catastrophe. R.I.P. Deathy. Chris Arducer was a phenomenal loss to the music scene. He was really something else. Multi-instrumentalist, singer-songwriter, and an amazingly talented drummer. So we start becoming obsessed with this other guy who's playing the same gear. He's got the backwards box, he's got the Strat and the JC120. And both of those guys, Fetters and Baloo, they both ditched the 120s because they're so heavy. And they're really loud, and you can't do that anymore. The sound guys and the club owners won't let you turn your guitar amp up that loud, but we were there for all those shows. We saw these incredible Psychodot shows with Fetters playing his heart out, and I've seen him do some unbelievable stuff with the guitar. Rob Fetters is, like, if you're a Baloo fan and you don't know about Fetters, you're missing the whole other half of that equation, which Adrian doesn't like it when you talk about Fetters when you're on his turf, which I don't blame him. And that's because how good Rob is. And what an incredible talent, songwriter, singer. Like, he's the whole package. And he's still doing it. Fetters is still going, So as time passes, I'm at this Psychodot show and I'm seeing this guy. I'm like, that's that Biff guy, Biff Moyer, Biff Blumfumgang. I don't know how to say his name, but we'll call him Biff Moyer. When I watched the King Crimson documentary, Court of the Crim King, 50 Years with King Crimson, Robert Fripp documentary, look, there's my buddy Biff. I kept seeing this guy who was playing violin on Baloo on his solo tour on Big Blue Sun. And he was at this Psychodot show at the Elbow Room in Chicago. And I was like, hey, you're Biff Moyer. And he was like, people don't recognize him that often. And I was like, yeah, I know who you are. And I was like, hey. How is he doing reverse guitar live? And this is the part of the story where we disagree on it. My memory of it is he told me he would tell me, but I had to buy him a drink. And we went to the bar and I said, what do you want? And he said, a White Russian. And he told me I've never had a White Russian in my life. Now, this was around the same time that Big Lebowski came out. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he just didn't want me retelling the story in every YouTube video I ever make. But yeah, I had to buy him a White Russian to find out about the RPS 10. And then I ended up, I couldn't find one, and I was really trying hard to find one. Like, I was calling every pawn shop and music store in Illinois. So I ended up calling Scott Summers, who's this musician, jazz guy. He's running the Boss Guitar Company. And I talked to him for a while. He was really great. and he hooked me up with a guy and sold me one. So I get a JC120, I get the Strat, I got the backwards box, I got the Boss GR50, and I did it. I got a 8-track Tascam reel-to-reel and started recording I quit the band and just dove into learning how to make music myself. And I still do that. Yesterday I woke up and I completely put a song in the bag in one day, which is, I can do that. Play all the instruments virtually with the keyboard, faking the drums with the software and all that. It's really easy. I still love to do it. I still love to make. Every year in January I record an album, and I've been using the VG8 a lot. So more recently, the VG8 came out in 1996 and the price tag was $26.95, and I was like, I could never afford that, and I lost interest in it. But then a guy who we met, Mutual Admiration Society, this guy calls himself Jimmy Photon, and we got to know each other, and he sent me a VG8 and then a VG88. And I've got them both. The VG8 sucks. VG8 is garbage. Don't waste your money on a VG8. The VG88, the expanded one, is really nice to get the expansion if you can. That's what I have. And I bought the CD with all the programs. So I had to go through a mind-numbing amount of patches and select the ones that I want and fill that up on my memory bank. So I've got all of the best sounds on my memory banks, and they're expanded, so it's a lot of patches. But the VG8, there's a lot of confusion and not knowing what it does because nobody's ever played one. You got to have the goofy pickup, and the way that, like I said, when you used to go into a music store, they would have one, and it looked like a stealth bomber, and they had a whole Roland like mini stage. Looked like Van Halen. It had the girders with the lights. There was a pair of 120s and that JC120 Roland Jazz Chorus amps. And I talk about all that in the other videos. That's what Ballou used to have. And you would go straight into the back of them, not through the front. You would eliminate the preamp for using all of the Roland COSM, composite object sound modeling. They were the first ones to come up with it, where we're going to make this computer into the amp and have it we're going to redesign the sound hexaphonically, one copy of each note through its own processor, and fully redesign it. So I've been through all that stuff. I use it for recording. It'll give you unbelievable sound quality with no lag, and it'll do everything up to high gain. You can't do modern metal tones on it because it came out in 96. Those tones didn't exist yet. So for all your older classic rock stuff, it's phenomenal. People say it isn't a synth. Well, it is. It is a synth, but it's not a conventional synth. And what it does do when it's in synth mode, it's better than guitar synth by a lot. The synth patches are called VO, and it's the most expressive guitar technology ever developed. So the sounds are weird. None of this VO sounds will imitate a traditional instrumentation. Okay, so if you're trying to do a clarinet, you're not going to get it with a VO patch. It's more like a rubber band that's, moonshot, echo loop, freakoid, ring modulator pitch is what you're going to get. And again, you can program it, so I don't know all of the VO. I just know the few patches I've tried. If you want to hear it, I have a playlist on this channel. You can go, there's an album from 2017 called Minor Technical Difficulties. That's all VG8. And a lot of VO patches early on to the VG8, demonstrating VO patches, which that's the most expressive thing. And it does not exist in the VG8. VG99, they never brought it back. They had it in the first one, and it was their most advanced, mind-bending. This is where it's just a patch. Certain patches are VO patch, and it means it's in synth mode, where it does something extra with the sound processing. And there is a demo song. If you go on this channel here, PD Two Finger, Roland VG8 demo song. There's a video, black and white, of some trains. Train crash at the end. And it's like sounds like a Western. And it's a choo-choo. It's kind of a trainy, the song. And it's got this, the main sound on it is like an underwater echo guitargan, like Leslie, tripped out Leslie sound, like LSD's kicking in on the back of your neck, water, trippy thing. That's the VO patch. So you can hear all this stuff and decide, is that something I'd really want? Do you need a boing, 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 like Rubber Band on Mars sound? That's VG8 will do it. The other place where the VG8 really shines is I have a Strat, I have a Fernandez Strat, that it's just a good Strat copy, and it has a sus-pain-iac. So this is a battery, 9-volt battery. I use a NIM pack that lives in my Strat. I put a jack in it and run a power cord to it, because a 9-volt will drain in a half hour. The NIM pack, you get like 12 hours out of it. Anyway, like everything I do here is indoors. I'm not miking amps. I have a horrible back pain. I have herniated disc. So if I want to record an album, I get that Strat that has the sustainer on it. And the sustainer has an octave mode that sounds like feedback. So I can record a whole album with headphones. I don't have to mic any amp. I can get all these sounds with just one guitar. Because see, anytime I get up or move, it hurts bad. Like I basically have to kind of recline. And maybe I can forget about the pain, but usually the pain is intense. So I can't do what I used to do, and I can barely do this, which is spin this knob on the VG8, which gives me all my presets. So that's what it's really good for. If you're recording and you need a variety of guitars, like just a bevy of guitar sounds without getting up, because it does acoustics, and man, they sound fantastic. The VG8 acoustics. They sound fantastic. It does acoustic 12 strings. It does electric 12 strings. It'll turn your guitar into a jazz box really well. It does hollow body 335 sounds pretty well. The banjos are great. So if you're like if you're stuck in high gain land, if you're a gent boy, if you're a young guy and you never have played guitar clean, you wouldn't want to waste your time with that. But if you're a more open-minded musician and you're going to play a variety of styles, you would use the VG8. Like if you're a songwriter and you need to do demos where later on you would bring in guys to play these parts, this is what it's for. So I would encourage you, if you're curious about guitar synths, Roland, and the 90's gear, like that sound, you don't have to have the Roland to get that sound. You can get it with anything. It's just a lot of compression, a really clean solid state amp sound, and then chorus and a lush reverb. That's it. They have all these lexicon reverbs that used to be such a big deal to some people. It's all that stuff could really easily be really overdone. Like all the gated reverb sounds in the 80s and 90s were just nuts. And I hear it now and I just cringe, They're way too much high end. Anyway, the VG8 is an incredible tool. VG88. The old one is the one you want. You don't want the new one. They go, you can plug it in. You don't have to have a GK2. Why would anyone? Let me take this hexaphonic thing. It's got 6 processors. We're only going to use 1. Anyway, as far as guitar synthesis goes, the VG8 is more modern than the 88. Forget that, it's garbage. And you can get all those other sounds. You don't, unless you're playing live. Like, see, Adrian and Rob Fetters, they, and I think Reeves Gabrels too. He used to, I'm pretty sure, used to play JC 120 amps, and they are really loud. great sounding solid state amp. The best pedal platform. And people that say solid state amps suck, that's because they've never played this amp. I've got a JC50 and a JC120, and I love the 50 because it's smaller. It's just one channel. But yeah, Rob Fetters and Adrian Ballou both stopped using those amps, and their tone, you can't hear them. I can't hear Ballou anymore. I go see him, I buy a ticket, I'm all excited, we get in there, he starts playing, I can't hear the guitar. And then they'll turn it up a little bit, like halfway through the first song. He'll point at the guy, or he never points, the guy just does it himself. The house guy will be like, wait, isn't there supposed to be a guitar? And then they'll turn it up. And where before, it was like, I told you that first time I saw Ballou when he played the backwards note in Hot Zoo, like it came, that sound came out like a wall, and everyone's hair got blown back, and Ballou was up there like, yeah, it's backwards. So if you can get a reverse delay, like that's the coolest thing that Roland Boss ever came out with. And it's the hardest to master, and it's the most interesting and the most bizarre thing. As far as the guitar synthesis goes, like you're better off just getting soft synths. You can get this synthesizer called Yuhi Zebra 2. You can get like a 30 meg file of that. It's still on Pirate Bay, I'm pretty sure. That's the most incredible synthesizer, man. If you want to do good with you got one of these, you don't have to worry about your Guitar Center. Just play your keyboard parts on the keyboard. And if you want to get really wacky, those VO patches on the VG88, that's where it's at. It's limited though, but as far as going down that road, and see, I've played the VG99. I know it does, like Ballou uses it for alternate tunings and for a couple other things. I'm not sure what he uses it for. I think it's more of a utilitarian thing. But honestly, the VG88 really shines as a recording tool. If you have a basic riff and you start laying down tracks and picking, okay, I'm going to do 2 acoustics and pan them, then I'm going to do a 12-string part, and you start a little banjo plucking, pretty soon you'll have this, like, that's the issue with it for me, is it gets too dense. I can't stop myself from laying down too many tracks. So if you want to hear what any of that stuff sounds like, again, on this channel, there's a playlists. You can go there, click on that playlist, and then it'll say albums. All of my older albums are using the VG8. Like 022020 is the name of an album to date that I recorded. That album, minor technical difficulties, digitally delayed. Although I used some modern modeling on that, on digitally delayed. So, Semantical Nightmare is the name of the album that everyone really loved, that I used the VG8. So if you like to hear it, if you're really interested in a VG8, that's why I made this series of videos. I hang around on an online auction site. That's where I get all this stuff that I got. Well, a good percentage of it comes from this place. And you can get gear, you can get old gear for a good deal sometimes. If you've seen me playing the yellow Strat, that was a black and white Squire that I got for $56, sanded it down, and built it up, and that's been my primary guitar for the past few years. And yeah, it's a Squire, but with the upgraded parts, it keeps up pretty well. And I've got my American standard Strat that I bought in the 90s. I've got my Fernandez Strat copy, so I've got that covered. As far as the effects stuff, like the stuff that's really turned me on is the sus-pain-iacs system. I love that. The MIDI guitar, the guitar synth stuff, like I use it now. I have a GR1 that Jimmy Photon gifted me, and I use the flutes and the vibes. There's certain sounds on that synth that I like to use, but and it has its sound too. It's pretty limited, you know. Like it seems like everyone that uses one of those things just picks like 2 or 3 sounds and they'll use it a little bit. So I can't really recommend the MIDI guitar that way. If you're gonna MIDI guitar something like the VG99 or some newer modeling thing that uses hexaphonic, definitely. Using these guitars, if you're gonna get the Fishman system and do it with your laptop and start triggering sound modules and doing stuff like that, definitely. But the old Roland guitar synth stuff, it's in my opinion, it's not worth chasing down. You're better off getting software synthesizers and just using a secondhand MIDI controller. But the VG8 is garbage. VG88, like I said, the VO patches, that's what guitar synth should be. It doesn't reproduce classical instrumentation, though. Like you can't do a flute or a vibe or a glockenspiel sound on the VG8. It does do like 12-string, banjo, you know, it's got acoustic sounds. It does that phenomenally well. That's what I would recommend. The VG8, recently, this online auction site, one was on there, and it's at $800. And I went and looked, and they have 2 of them on eBay that are $1,000. Back a few years ago, you couldn't give these away. They were like $100. So things are changing in the guitar gear market, and this is one of those things where there aren't a lot of them for people to try. You got to have the pickup mounted to the guitar. It's a special guitar you got to have. So it might get into some people's heads like, this thing cost almost $3,000 when it came out. I got to have it. I'm here to tell you, the Cosm thing, the VG88, it is really a lot of fun. It is really cool. The VO stuff, it's the best. It's the most expressive. There's this element when you play a guitar synth where none of the feeling, there's like a lag. Like if you bend a note, it comes out bending and it sounds off. It's like you're no longer really connected to the sound. And you have to alter the way you're playing. Your guitar is not the instrument. They're 2 separate things. Your guitar is a controller for the instrument, and there is a significant deficit in between those 2 things. So when you talk about VO, and Roland said this is the most expressive guitar technology, that is illustrated in when you're playing it, it feels like you're fucking playing the same guitar. You know, it's like, it's badass. I'm not gonna lie. And that's everything that the Roland guitar synth experienced that I didn't foresee that. Because the only time I ever got and sat down, it was a GR700. And as soon as I started going through patches and just hitting the E and trying to find a patch suitable for me to play something I know that wasn't Turbo Lover flanging Judas Priest, because that's really what the GR700 does its best, by the way. By the time I got through a half a dozen patches, the clerk, who looked like he was the guy from Winger, pointy boots, huge hair, big unbuttoned shirt, Coke spoon, he came over and shut the power on it, and he was like, "Kid, you'll never be able to afford one of these or something like that. So because of that, this is why I'm here to make a 4.5 hour long series of videos talking about Boss and Roland and the gear. What's worth your time. Now I know they've got a bunch of newer, more modern stuff. I don't know about that. They got that yellow one, that Boss. There's a couple, I thought there was a distortion Boss, the hexaphonic distortion. All that other stuff, like I remember when Boss announced they were coming out with some smaller pedals that use the GK2, I got so excited, and I never really saw any of that stuff. So I suppose any of that stuff that's newer that uses the GK2, I don't know about any of that. I don't know about the VG99. It might be great. I don't know. I don't think it is. I think the last good thing that Roland made that uses the GK2 is the fucking VG88. And I think the cat's out of the bag about that now. I think people know. That's why they're no longer $100. That's why people are like, this is worth something. So, in the meantime, get a reverse delay and start playing with that. You need to learn how to solo in reverse. That's where it's at. And if you use a wah-wah with that, like really, you don't even need distortion. The reverse sound works really well with a clean or slightly overdriven guitar. You could just as soon use a dirty guitar, but there's something to be said about cleaner, or like the distortion that Rory Gallagher would get, where you're talking about like a range master, where a lot of the guitar's harmonic content is pushed forward and not just turned into a square wave like what a Big Muff does. Big Muff, that's what I used, with an EQ pedal with the mid squashed. It'll work, you know. A lot has changed for me. That being said, if you want to throw your money down the Roland pit, reverse delay, the sus-pain-iacs is the coolest guitar toy. Any of that newer stuff. Boss makes this yellow one that's kind of like a budget version to dip your feet in, where it's like it's like 500 new. You probably get it for 300 used. That thing, I don't know about that. I'm thinking it's probably really cool. So, again, the guitar synth thing, I end up using it for like little accents. I'll put like a water flute, like doot 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 chicka doot doot. I'll do little things in there to fill the song out. And really, even with the VG88, having all the acoustics and the banjos and all these like 12 string, like there's a patch called Livin' Lovin' Made that's Jimmy Page using his 12 string electric. Oh man, that patch. That's your the $1,800 or the $2,600 price tag right there. Anyway, you guys, I hope it clears it up. The VG8, when people say it's not a synth, it angers me because it's the best synth that Roland made. It's just unbelievably limited, and it causes you to redefine your definition of what a guitar synth is, if you even know what one is in the first place. I thought it just made your guitar sound really weird because it's a guitar synth. That's what it does. When a lot of times what I end up using it for is traditional instrumentation. And at that point, you're smarter using a MIDI keyboard because there's no lag then. So it's really, unless you're going to be doing it live and you want to like pull a rabbit out of a hat, you know, you want people to go, oh my God, he's playing drums on his guitar. The guy's what sorcery is this? And there's something to be said about that. When I was doing it, what did make me feel really cool when the other bands we were playing with would line up by my side of the stage and be squinting, trying to figure out And they're like, what are you playing through? You know, and we had all of our badges, they all said Poland, and, you know, we... I would modify mine. My partner would cover them up with tape. I don't know, he thought he was going to headline at the bowling alley, which they did, and I never knew that there would be a band that would attract a group of overweight females, but they were them. They had a lot of girls that followed them that were like, you know, 28 to 40 in that little old. They weren't really younger. And huge girls. I never, it was weird. It was weird. Like, I don't know if I don't know the other guys in the band, if they were into that or what it was. And it was just odd. But yeah, I got out of that band and started buying more recording equipment and promised myself I would never work with a group of people again, because those guys that I were working with were such head cases, and they were such bad alcoholics and weed addicts that it took them, they were getting together and getting so messed up, it would take them like 6 months to a year to do one demo song, and the song sounded terrible because it was pieced together over 25 recording sessions where they tore everything down and set it up in between, and all the knobs were changed. It was just, they'd set up and spend, you know, we had all this gear, and the singer would be there, and the other guy, the guitar player that owned the studio equipment, would go, okay, you got to set up a patch. And then it would just be him going, check, and all these, like, you know, echoes and pitch shifting and flanging, and that would go on for hours, where they sat there and drank and did their one hits, and then they would be so messed up, one of them would fall and something would break. So there's that end of it too. And when you go down that, like, there's something to be said about not having too much gear, about forcing yourself to work with when you're hungry, you know. So anybody who relies on gear, you know, poor workman blames his tools. This is the oldest thing in the book, and this is coming from me, a guy who's a gearhead, who really, you could say, yeah, I was guilty of employing stuff, but at the same point, do you think I really relied on technology, or I utilized it?
Oh yeah, you utilized it.
Yeah, I used everything. I mean, sometimes I made mistakes and I didn't know, and I would think, oh, this would be worth it. And then it's like, well, okay, the thing wasn't really what I had hoped it was for, but I played bass through it, and I used it as a drum module for my studio. My guitar synth is responsible for a bunch of imaginary albums that represent years of my hopes and dreams in recording. And I got to be real clear about this. As far as hopes and dreams, it never went any further than being able to create a piece of music that would move me emotionally. I never wanted to be able to, like, give my tape to somebody and go, no, I'm going to make it big. That never was part of the question. It was, or the intent. It was just, I know the power of a studio, somebody like, you know, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Adrian, like what he could do. Make something that had this, like, massive emotional value to it. That's what I wanted to do. Not so much like a precision, but like really impressive as a artistic piece to create an emotion. That's my thing. You know, and as time's passed, like, I've just completely given no forethought. I'll experiment. I'll come up with different themes. Oh, this recording I'm gonna do all acoustic this time. This time, only going to use the bass guitar. How does that sound? Anyway, you guys, thank you for joining me on my video series on Roland Boss in the 90s, what that meant to me, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you for sticking with me. I can't apologize for it for going as long as it did, simply because it's a massive amount of time went into me being able to even condense this down into a short thing. Like, you think this was long? Imagine the amount of time that went in and effort to come to these conclusions. So you got off easy. Something like a modern multi-effect amp modeler like a Helix. You know, you can't go wrong getting something like that. Something that does amp modeling and effects and has a real lot of people in the user base. If you can afford to not get a budget unit and get something like that, that's what you want to do. And the more people using it, that's what you want. You know, right now I'm playing through a NUX MG30, and I absolutely love it. I have an MG300, the little brother, and the MG30, and I could not be happier with that. But my needs are pretty simple. It's, you know, cleanish, tasteful. I'm not playing through the Big Muff anymore. Anyway, you guys, thank you so much. Again, best of luck to you in all of your travels. I try to like to say, hug your pets, and that's the most important part. So take care.